Hello and welcome to the Dingometer, where we tackle tricky issues in learning design and uncover the factors that produce awesome learning experiences. It's Friday, we're live, and I'm very delighted to be joined by Phil Gom, Director of Learning Design at Ding Learning, and Rob Roach, who is an author, researcher and tutor in digital media at the University of the Creative Arts. Now, Rob has recently completed research into how dyslexia impacts people with reading difficulties. And Phil and I were really keen to talk to Rob about the work that he's done, the research that he's done, because dyslexia, as with many aspects of neurodiversity, is something that we need to consider very strongly when we're designing learning. So over the course of this podcast, we're going to be asking Rob about his research, and we're going to be teasing out some implications for learning design and things that we can learn, often very practical things around how to design more effective documents, learning assets, videos, how to use text and images more effectively. So really looking forward to getting into this today. So Rob, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining us today, and Phil too.
Hello.
You first did a PG Cert a long time ago, because I remember while I was at the university with you, and you have an interest in inclusivity. So perhaps could you say a little bit first about what first sparked your interest in going beyond the PG Cert? What were your initial interests in learning in neurodiversity?
So I kind of like a weird schooling. I went to a school that had a dyslexic unit. So on one hand, amazing, lots of support, but you was also kind of isolated from everywhere else. So if you had dyslexia or a learning or a neurodiversity, you were moved into this unit and you were taught separately, which was amazing. It was really nice. It was lots of help, but you kind of missed that whole being in mainstream education. So I've always felt that there should be like the join together. And I know when I was doing my PGC, it was as they started to remove some of the support. So the support came more from the tutor-led side of it. So I remember with PGC, I did some research into how that support could come from like apps and be supported by digital support. But I've always felt everything should be inclusive. Everyone should be safe and happy and easy to learn.
It's a good point, isn't it? Because we talk a lot on things like PG Certs around inclusivity and accessibility, but often it's not always evident how to implement those things practically. So everyone understands the need, but often if you're not someone who has dyslexia, for example, then you know that you need to anticipate it, but sometimes it's difficult to fully empathize with that, because it's difficult to sort of see and experience what it's like. So what led you into doing your MA then? So what experiences have sort of interested you in doing further research?
So part of my role at UCA, one of my task visuals looked at how to make things more inclusive. Started off with like for every session has a little A5 flyer, and it has a picture of what you're going to do, where you're going to be, what you need to bring, everything you can expect. So you can walk in the room and you're happy, and then the next one is sitting on the door as you leave, so you can take that and you know what's coming. So that's kind of where the inclusivity bit started. And I've always been interested with dyslexia. I was diagnosed when I was about 4 or 5 with this. But everyone seems to try to fix it. So it's like, use this typeface, it will make your life easier. Use this file size, change your color to a pink background. It will make all these things better. But always from people who don't have dyslexia. And it's like, this will fix everything you've got and will make your life so much easier. But I don't really know if that's going to work. So it's like, from some research, blue is meant to be a really nice background to use. I can't stand it. I can't see anything on blue. And from chatting to staff, students with and without dyslexia, pink seems to be the nicest color. And it seems to be always out of pink by the photocopy, because everyone loves a pink background. It makes life easier. So instead of looking at the project for the MA of trying to fix dyslexia, I wanted to make people dyslexic who aren't, so they can see what it's really like. Because I always have this like dread of going back, even being in a dyslexic unit, you were still expected to read books at GCSE level, and you had to stand there and speak it to the class, and it was torturous.
Yeah, well, if I can just cut across you and quote back at you, because I'm actually looking at the preface of the book that you finished, and what speaks to me very strongly is your preparedness to talk really, and to admit and to confess to difficult experiences. Because I think that, to be honest with you, my interests in learning design, I think I can track them back to very personal anecdotes, if you know what I mean. So it's not necessarily an intellectual position that has driven me to where I am now. It's an ability to remember a formative moment very, very strongly. And I'm just going to quote this back at you. So you talk here And let me see if I'm looking at the right section. So yeah, you talk here about having to stand up in class and read aloud. I think you talk about this was an activity I had to do for GCSEs, where we all took turns to read paragraphs of Strong Cold by Robert Swindells. And then it says also on your BA, you were asked to read a section from your dissertation. And even though it's a slight reference in the preface, it's clear that they still vibrate for you, those memories of standing up. And I'm assuming, certainly maybe on the GCSE and then on the BA, that there wasn't any caveats put around that for you by the teacher. It was just like, get on with it. This is how we do it, right?
Not really. I have this like terrifying flashbacks of the dissertation of being at the front of a room, all darkly lit, and just pin like a spotlight on it. I'm sure it wasn't that. I'm sure it was in a really nice lit room with windows and everything. But in my head and what I remember, it was absolutely terrifying. And I know I got so wound up by it, I managed to read a paragraph in about 20 minutes, had a mini panic attack at the end and had to leave the room. And then it's just the anxiety and the fear of then having to go back into that room after you've had like a little bit of a breakdown at the front because you got so stressed. And it's my own writing. I should know this. But because people don't know what it's like, they don't understand it.
Well, can I ask you a quick question there about what do you think was the sort of the learning aim or goal that was driving the need for you to speak out loud, if you know what I mean? So obviously there was an idea there that the performance of your own writing, the reading out loud, that element, that was doing something important, or there was a value to that. For you, it was a backfire. It sort of devalued all of your achievements. But why do you think people put an emphasis on that kind of performance of reading and sort of comprehension? Why do you think that learners think, educators think that that's so important?
I'm not sure. I suppose if you've got the confidence to stand there and read it and confidently say it, and I suppose it looks like you've written the right thing and you're happy. And if you read through it and you stumble up, you can spot little mistakes. I can spot any mistakes. It was filled with mistakes, so many. But I didn't know them. I couldn't see them. I mean, it's only, and I'll admit it now, I'm just about to turn 30, and I've only almost got my head around there, and there. And I'm still not sure if I've got two of them right. But I think the idea of if you could read it, then you've done it right, and it's good, and then you can get some feedback. But I would have got more from just having a quiet chat with a group of friends at the side without that added pressure, because the pressure wasn't needed.
It's interesting, as it's like you say, as Phil says, there's always this assumption that standing up and talking is good, and you can argue that, but there's always that danger that there's a failure to anticipate the needs of people who may find that difficult, and that they're forced to do that, and it's alternatives aren't provided, or it's just it's a way of expressing learning that advantages some, disadvantages others. So I'm keen to sort of dig into this, because you mentioned that you wanted to help people experience some of the difficulties of reading, which is great, because I mean, so often you read about dyslexia, you read about dyspraxia, ASD in books, and you're like, okay, I need to accommodate these things and adapt learning design, but it is very difficult to empathize sometimes. So how did you start to think about bringing this to life? What first gave you the idea of using examples to bring it to life?
I've done there's 10 examples in the book. They were all sort of, some of them joined together from the research that I did like an open survey on Instagram, and it was no asking for names, contacts, nothing. It was just, have you had dyslexia? Do you have issues reading? What does text do to you? I didn't want to know anything about the person, so you could be completely honest about it. And then some of them are joined together, some of them are quite overlapped, down to 10 examples. The first 3 or 4 examples in the book, super easy, because it's exactly the same as what I get. I get shaky words, get like bleaching, bits of white, overexposed bits, and then my eye drifts off to like birds in the street, and it all goes weird. Made perfect sense to me. I could understand those. And the rest of them, I had no idea, because there was ones about hybrid text where like words merge and expand and go together. I don't get that. So I had no idea. So after I was producing the examples, there was lots of talking to people who I know have dyslexia or might have some reading issues, who may have filled in the form, but I never wanted to know who filled it in, to get some feedback to them, see if they were going in the right direction or not, and then developed and changed them from there.
What happened next then? Because the first thing was to gather these experiences, and then obviously you had to make sense of them, but then you've managed to then produce visualizations of these things. So how did you do that? What guided you, and to sort of how did you validate that and verify?
So there was lots of chatting to people. I've been with all of my students. I'm extremely open about my dyslexia. I do in-class and online teaching, ranging from like 12 to like 80. I'm not going to lie about it because I make mistakes. I'd say in the book, it was only this year. I've been teaching InDesign for about 15 years, and I've been calling a font Apple Chemistry. It's Apple Chancery. No idea. It's been going on for 15 years, and no one's called me out on it. And there was someone this year who was like, "That's right." I'm like, "Oh my goodness, I will change that." And it's really obvious. And I was like, I have a whiteboard that I write shortcuts on, and I'm going to be really obvious because I'm going to get it wrong. I'm going to get your name wrong. I will almost definitely forget your name after you've told me, but I remember your face and I remember your work, and I can put the two together, but names doesn't happen. I've gone off in like a random tangent now.
No, it's just interesting, like I say. And then how did you sort of get this through to actually producing the examples? Because I mean, that's quite a complex thing that you've done. When you look at it in the book that you've produced, it's fascinating how you've done it.
Yeah, and also you've got and this is a side conversation, but you're sort of using augmented reality as well. So you're sort of, it's a book, but also by scanning QR codes, and you have your phone. And I think sort of, as I said, this is a side observation, but when people are always saying, "Oh, VR is coming to radically change education," everyone's like watching the horizon, waiting for VR to radically change. But the idea of augmented reality and that sort of idea of using your phone to bring a book to life, that to me seems like a very interesting place that you've opened up, particularly when you're trying to produce this very immersive, you're trying to simulate other people's perceptions, and that the abilities for the phone, the QR code, the book, to me it seems like a very interesting and neat expression. So obviously there's some tech there, but the tech is in service of trying to make this experience very immediate, right?
Yeah. So some of the examples, I couldn't really think of anything to animate from them. So when I was doing this project, it's gone over about 12, 13 weeks or so. The research came around about the middle to get all this, and I color coded everything. And some of them made perfect animation ideas. Some of them were going to make really nice prints, and his whole idea was going to make printing blocks, and I did like a little series of postcards to go with it. And some of them they don't need the animation. So in the like the artist copy of the book that I submitted, there's ones where it's layers of tracing paper, so you have to go through each layer until you get to the final outcome, to try and imitate having to read things again and again and again until it actually gets into your head. Whereas some of them with like drifting eyes, bleachiness, hybrid, vibration, they made so much more sense to have some form of animation. And for a long time, I didn't know what format this was going to take. And the book just seemed to like organically turn into what it was going to turn into. And then I'm like, I need to have some animation. It needs to move. Otherwise, it's just text on a page, which is where the augmented reality turned up from there.
It's fascinating, and just I suppose on the technical level, how did you do it? Because I was looking at the examples and just watching the text move around. It's like, wow, this is fascinating. But I'm really intrigued as to how you've done it.
Days and days and days in After Effects. Probably more weeks and weeks in After Effects. Some of them were nice and simple, little bits of moving. Some of them, there's a couple of them where like every single character is animated and goes through different typefaces. I did some research into like the standard font for a book, which turns into be Garamond. So I got a copy of Garamond, and then I manipulated it in like I think it was 10 different ways. So some are really thin, some are larger. There's lots of talking of like flipped and moved, and like I's, J's, K's, and L's all looking the same. So they all got jumbled up in the typeface. So if you type it on the computer and you type it correctly, it will all go crazy on the screen. So this idea of you know what you're trying to type, but it's not going to come out. And there's an example in there where someone said about I'll type something or I'll write something and I know it's right. I'm sure it's right. And I only know it's wrong when someone tells me it's wrong. So I did some writing and tried to type something out without looking, and I tried to make the same mistakes I know I always make. And that's where that one came from, the idea of I might think it's right. And I do a lot of writing in InDesign, mainly because it doesn't have a spell check that's really obvious. Then I take it out and spell check it, because the red lines they distract me so much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I can see that. Then, so based on what you've found out, then what are the key things that you've learned through the research? Because you mentioned earlier that there are often some very cookie cutter, for want of a better word, approaches to responding to dyslexia, color backgrounds, font choice, and I've recommended some of those myself when I've been teaching, because again, as someone who doesn't have dyslexia, I'm guided by what I read and what are the broadly accepted strategies. But as you said, for you, those things don't always work. So how has your research changed your understanding of what you recommend for supporting learners with dyslexia? What are the key things that you've learned?
So there's a lot of like dyslexic fonts that you meant to work. I can't read any of them. They just really confuse me. If anything, some of them make me more dyslexic than I am already. And I chatted to a couple of tutors and people who have got dyslexia, and they're like, I can't do that. It makes no sense. Then I was put onto Lexand, which is a font that's on Google Fonts. Comes in a range of sizes. It's really nice. Everything's nice and even. There's no flipped characters. Really easy to read. The idea of having double, if not triple line space, so you've got space to read. Single column with lots of space, so the book's later it's only written on the right hand side and the left is it's empty, so you've got time to breathe. A decent size of like 12 or up. Coloured backgrounds, different coloured backgrounds do different things. So for me, it has to be pink. Super easy for me to read. I gave it to one of the tutors, and he's like, I can't read any of this. Can you do me a blue copy? So I've done a copy on blue, and you can read that really nicely. So kind of like personal preference. And I know when it comes to like delivering workshops or you're giving a big talk or something, you can't cover everyone. Otherwise, you've got like 1,000 different colours and different sizes and formats and everything. But the idea of having space, nothing's really crammed, nothing's too tightly curtained together, so you've got some breathing space. And personally, I like to have a bit of space I can doodle in the corner. So if you have like a big page, a bit of text, and you've got some space, so you can write notes. So you've got some space to breathe when you're going through the whatever it is you're trying to read or be told about.
I mean, I'm reminded a little bit because obviously you're a visual artist as well. So this idea of like, I'm thinking of gallery spaces, and in gallery spaces, there is a convention or an understanding. And I guess the summer exhibition is the exception, where people just maximize what's on the walls, but in sort of like galleries, the negative space, the white space, the gaps, everybody understands the power of the gap, don't they? The space, because they know that if you cram photographs together, they start to discuss to each other, they start to, so you're not actually able to necessarily, and you can do it on purpose, obviously, but so negative space, would you say, as you were talking, it seemed to be a lot about the gaps, the spaces, the breadth around a layout or around a word, or indeed the letters inside of a single word. That negative space is a key sort of like a component to think about in terms of sort of dyslexic. Is that I'm projecting there?
Definitely.
You'd recognize,
Space around things is so much easier because you can track it much easier. Whereas if you pick up like a generic novel, it's always really tight, really squished, and just they're trying to put so many words on the page, and then I just drift all over the place and I don't know what's going on.
Again, I'm just reminded. We did a podcast last week, and it had a garden theme, and we were talking about north-facing gardens, but and using it as analogous to learning design problems, but there's a I was watching a TV program bizarrely on Japanese floristry, and Japanese floristry is governed by a principle I think called ma, which is a word, and I may be saying it wrong or not quite right, but conceptually the word means gaps or the space that, like in Japanese gardens or in Japanese displays, the ma, it's the leaves that you pick out. So on a branch, the work is about creating gaps between leaves so you can see the leaves, so you can see and read the object. And I'm just reminded a bit as and looking at your book as well, that it feels like you spent quite a lot of time picking leaves out.
I can see that. Yeah. Nice.
It's interesting as well if you extrapolate that into learning design more generally, because we're talking about designing into space and the importance of space to help you see things. And I think that it does feel like there's a broader concept there around if there's just too much in something, you can't see it for what it is, whether that's a text or a page, or it might be a sequence of activities. If there's too much going on, you fail to see the relevance of any of those things. And so actually, and this does feel like it's one example of something that benefits everyone. If you create more space to breathe, as you said, if you create more negative space, if you improve everyone's ability to focus, then everyone will see what you're trying to communicate more effectively. It sort of benefits everyone.
Yeah, definitely. I'm hoping to try and deliver some like CPD development days, and I really want to write instructions in these dyslexic fonts that I've made, and then give them to people to try and do like a nice simple task, so like 3 or 4 steps, and like have a go, and make like the most like uninclusive piece of text I can using flip fonts, bad pictures, really squashed, really tightly knit text, and be like, it's really difficult. And you've had to run around the room to fix off 1,000 problems. Where if you make something nice and easy, in a font that's readable, with breathing space, nice pictures, nice colored background, your life will be so much easier.
So you sort of think that, so there are, it seems there that I'm imagining that there are some hacks that you could give everybody that would instantly mitigate produce. So there's like again, there's like a sort of a dyslexic's guide to negative space and those things, which would actually be just a guide to making decent, readable, accessible materials, right?
Yeah. So at the back of the book, I've got I call it suggestions. So it goes over like point sizes, spacing, some font options, colored backgrounds. Like, it can be really clean, simple, to the point. No waffling, especially like a brief and things. I mean, personally, I like to know what it is, what I need to do, and when I've got to have it done by, and then I can deal with the waffly bit afterwards. So I thought, if it's because originally, this book was the idea of like giving it as a teaching aid to teachers so they can see what it's like. So I thought I need to put some suggestions in the back so it can be kind of like a helping guide to them as well.
We were in a client meeting yesterday in a particular institution, and there was reviewing some feedback, and there was a piece of learner feedback to describe their experience of a reading list or a lecture, and they used this term word salad. That it just felt like a word salad. That there was just language everywhere and words everywhere, and that idea of a tossed salad of sorts of.
One of the comments is that when I look at text, it turns into word soup.
That's interesting. I get it.
Yeah.
But I've got a sort of a paradox that's beginning to establish in my brain here, because I know that you finished this book and you're on the cusp of this achievement, but I understand that there's a conference looming, right? So you're going to go to conference. So does that conference, because a conference is kind of a space, a busy space, a congested space, a space of there's lots of words and competing signals. I mean, what's that going to be like, do you think? I mean, how are you engaging with the conference, and does that return you to that classroom, that GCSE moment? Have you got, what's that going to be like?
So the conference came out for like my initial bit of research for this project. I went straight to the British Dyslexia Association, like perfect place to start, and had a conference. So I thought, let's do it. Why not? So I went for an abstract, and I wish I went for like a stand up and present something, because I'm really proud of what I've done. I feel like I've got something to present and could go on for a good 30, 40 minutes or so. But I went for a poster submission. So I'm going to try and turn some of the examples into a poster. And with the idea of it going back to like school, I'm doing a talk about this on Friday, and it could be between like 20 and 200. I'm not sure who's turning up. I'm moderately terrified.
I was going to ask you, how do you feel about that? So like, there you are back having to articulate, you described, didn't you, that although it may be a sort of like a false memory of your dissertation in a room with a single spotlight and the sweat running down your back. I mean,
there has been talks of like polishing my head and spotlighting it, but then
well, you do have a very shiny head. It has to be said.
It's weird. If you give me Photoshop, I can talk to you about Photoshop happily to thousands for hours, no problem at all. Talk about myself, terrified. No, I'm kind of looking forward to it. It should be okay. The idea of standing in front of people and talking now doesn't terrify me as much as it used to. I think because I can waffle now more than I haven't got to read something.
Exactly. So I was going to say, so maybe this is my imprecision, because I'm assuming the thing that produces the thing that changes the idea of public speaking, or that forum, is the fact that you are actually public speaking mediated through reading. So as soon as you are just talking, like now we're just talking and we're talking live, but if you were reading a prepared statement, you'd be having a completely different experience.
Right? Terrifying, panicked a lot, everything. The idea of just putting some pictures up and just chatting to a room for half an hour, cool, I can do that. That's not too stressful. I'm sure I'll be terrified 5 minutes before it, but then I should be okay once I get
started. That's just healthy fear. We all get that.
Exactly.
That's interesting. I mean, the other thing I wanted to ask you about, you mentioned, or I think there's a lot of potential for modelling. One of the things that we've learned a lot since we started doing is the power of role modelling, and often with things like dyslexia, it is hard to role model that, because you're never quite sure if you're doing it from a point of an informed perspective, or if you're, it's difficult to get that right. But it feels like you've got something now, you've developed something really powerful that you can role model with your students and be really proactive for that. So how do you think, or do you think you will use what you've produced with your own learners, and if so, how?
Yeah, definitely. So the project for the MA was like 2 halves. So the book was 1 half, and I got like hyper obsessed with letterpress printing. So I decided to make a little mini press. So that's led to me just having it in the studio, and we've been printing and chatting to students, and all the students know what I'm doing. They know about dyslexia, they know about the books, they know about trying to do the MA and work and all of this. So we'll have this like open dialogue. And the conversations around text and type and reading and writing, it's been really powerful. If they've had issues reading, I mean, the amount of time I've got the whiteboard and I'm like, oh my goodness, I don't have spell component, and someone will help me spell it. And I don't feel any shame, and I hope if anyone else needed help with spelling, it's fine. It's a nice open space. So being able to like break down any of these stigmas around it, that's what I'm hoping it will be able to do.
Yeah, it feels like it's a powerful way to give people permission to talk about it, because often when particularly when you're dealing with young learners coming into higher education, there's that fear that we all have of having to fit in, how, what the expectations are, and we've got to be like that. But that your ability to diffuse that and say, it's okay, let's talk about it, here's some examples, this is something that I struggle with, and this is there's some strategies that work for me. I mean, that it feels like there's a lot of power in that for helping younger learners just sort of be okay with it, if you see what I mean, and not put that sort of pressure on themselves.
I remember when I started teaching, I felt like I needed to be that knowledgeable other. And I was standing there, and I was going to stand there, and I was going to talk about Photoshop, and he would copy me and do everything I wanted you to do. Obviously, that failed after the first lesson. Like, this is useless. So I now spend all my days running around, making sure I know where everyone is in the room, and I know exactly what they are and what step they're on, and then I've got my list and everything. And they all know about dyslexia. I'm currently going through ADHD screenings, because pretty sure I've got that. So all of these things join together, and I'm open about it all. So then we can have that conversation about it if they want to.
I mean, I think partly what I'm hearing there is something that I recognise. It's a word. The word I'm going to use now will be immediately misunderstood, because it's been hollowed out, I think, by every single Instagram influencer and but this idea of leveraging vulnerability. Now, I'm not talking about sort of like, I'm a TV producer and on a talent show, and we need to hear everyone's story about their gran. But I do think that sort of one of the learning design maneuvers, one of the things that learners really value and is a powerful thing, is vulnerability, the preparedness for the more knowledgeable other. And that sometimes is given to you whether you are or not, because you're a bit older, or because you have the job description of tutor or whatever. So you, in a way, you have to walk into the space of the more knowledgeable other, because I don't think that learners want you to say, oh, I'm no different to you. I think what they want is to say, I am more knowledgeable, but I am brave enough and prepared enough and confident enough to be vulnerable, because I'm going to share with you that I worry about the same things that you do, or that I have a memory of standing up in a classroom and feeling as nervous at this exact time. And I think it's the more knowledgeable others who pretend that they were never young and pretend that they were never scared, and who believe that their expertise is to perform a kind of perfection. I think that is where expertise is problematic for learners. So I'm not asking experts to be vulnerable, like boo-hoo and overshare. It's knowing when to remember in front of someone in a powerful way what it was like to not know how to do something, right?
Yeah, no, I'd completely agree. Yeah, so one of the things I've started doing is I do online summer schools. So we either do them once a week, or we do them on like Saturday club sort of style. Are really obvious, because the way we deliver them, I don't see their faces, because they're all under 16, so they have the webcam off and the microphone off, so it's all through chats. And I can't read names. I get them wrong all the time. And I'm like, day one, before I even do the presentation, before they even know who I am, I'm like, I'm dyslexic. I will get your name wrong, and I will spell something wrong when I message you back for what you need to fix in your model. Bear with me. If it makes absolutely no sense, just let me know, and I will spell check it again and send it to you, and hopefully it will work. And I've had emails from parents going like, oh my goodness, you say it. I'm like, well, obviously it's not a secret. It's just a thing.
Yeah. I remember, for me, I get to say things like, now, I'll get your name wrong because I'm old.
We all get there. So, Rob, mentioned you've got the conference coming up, and so just final question: what next with the book? Are you intending? Will you publish it? Is it going to be openly available? How can people get it?
I'm currently trying to get it published on Amazon's Kindle publisher thing. It's in review. Hopefully another day, and it should be on there ready to go.
Exciting. Yeah, we've just gone through the same thing ourselves with publishing our own book, so it's a good process to go through, but that's good. So it will be openly available that people can purchase it.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Amazing. Well, once that link comes through, send it to us and we'll put that in the show notes for the podcast. Good. And very excited to see you getting out there and going and talk about it. Thanks very much for taking time to talk to us today about it. And it's just would advise everyone listening to have a look at it and read it, particularly the recommendations, and look at the examples, because it really does an amazing job of bringing dyslexia to life.
Awesome.
Thank you all. Thanks, Rob.